So in this video, we're going to be talking about the three characteristics or three facts or features about economic fluctuations. And these are typically common to any economy because most economies face economic fluctuations. And so you can apply these concepts to any country or any economy. Now, in the previous video, you had seen that real GDP fluctuates a lot in the short run, and sometimes it is above its trend level, and sometimes it's below. So we have expansions and we have contractions, and it's very difficult to predict what's going to happen because these fluctuations tend to be very irregular and very unpredictable. So that takes us to our first feature of economic fluctuations, that fluctuations are really highly irregular and unpredictable. Although we call these fluctuations and we coin the term business cycle, the term business cycle could be sometimes misleading because it suggests that economic fluctuations follow some sort of a regular or predictable or rigid pattern, but it is not the case. Business cycles are just a term that refers to booms and recessions, or in other words, expansions or recessions, which suggest that the economy may be expanding in certain times and contracting in certain times. And when does this happen is very difficult to predict. So the second feature of economic fluctuations is that most macroeconomic variables or most macroeconomic quantities typically tend to fluctuate together. So when we think about economic fluctuations, we typically use the real GDP to see whether we are in a real GDP growth rate of real GDP to see whether we are in an expansion or we are in a recession. So in the last video, we said that if real GDP was positive, we are expanding as an economy, and if real GDP turns negative for 2 or more quarters, then we are in a recession, right? So this is true for real GDP, and it helps us understand what's going on, but there are other types of macroeconomic variables that we are interested in. For example, income or spending or investment or production. And depending upon whatever is going on with real GDP, whether it's rising or falling, the same thing would be happening to these different variables as well. Okay, so let's take a look at really, is this true in the data? So here we have the blue line, which is the real gross domestic product, which is your real GDP over time for the United States. And in the green line here, this one, are consumption expenditures, right? So obviously consumption is a component of GDP, so it's going to be less than GDP, and so that's why it is this line is below. There's also investment, which is this last line over here. And what we see here is that, notice in this last recession over here, in 2007 and 2009, all of these three series are falling, right? So they tend to move together. If they're rising, they're rising together. If they're falling together. So this is one other important takeaway when we think about economic fluctuations. And lastly, if output, right? By output, we mean real GDP again, right? Real GDP, which is our Y from chapter 10. If output falls, unemployment would typically rise. So if production is falling, and if we are producing less goods and services year on year, that would mean that more people are out of work or looking for work. So unemployment would rise. So we can take a look at what is going on with unemployment we can remove these lines that we had, and we can plot unemployment and real gross domestic product together. So let's add a line which is called unemployment rate to see what happens. You can plot the unemployment rate, or you can plot the level of unemployment. It's hard to see here, but we can try to edit this line, the first line, and we can make it percent change, and that would be easier to see. Yeah, so this is good. Now this blue line right here, this is your unemployment rate, and this is your the line on the top is your unemployment rate, and the line at the bottom is your real GDP growth rate. And maybe we can just focus on this last recession right here, right? This gray region, which is showing you that when unemployment, when real GDP is negative, right? Right here, real GDP is negative 2.16. The unemployment rate is soaring. It's going up. You see, this is climbing up. And this is showing you that they typically move in opposite directions. If real GDP is falling, unemployment will be soaring. And if real GDP is positive, unemployment will be falling. So this is the third characteristic of economic fluctuations.